The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a day of soft Dublin rain and the smell of wet tarmac. It was an intrusion of the past, a ghost of salt and peat delivered to Finnian Blackwood's sterile, book-lined world. The envelope was damp, the ink of his address bleeding slightly. It bore the postmark of the Isle of Crows, a place he had spent the last decade trying to forget. He slit it open with a letter knife, a relic from his former life as a historian. Inside, the script was spidery and panicked, the hand of Father Michael, the island's perpetually nervous priest. Finn had never liked the man, had always seen him as a weak shepherd tending a flock of wolves. Finnian, I pray this finds you. I would not ask if it were not the direst of needs. The old ways, they are not just being remembered, they are being reborn. Maeve has them all in her thrall. The harvest has failed again, the nets come up empty. She speaks of a debt to the soil, an ancient tithe. She promises renewal, but her words are poison. They are preparing for the gloom harvest. You know what that means. I fear for the island's soul, but more, I fear for your brother. Tucked inside the folded letter was a photograph, a cheap, overexposed print. It showed his brother, Liam, standing before the crooked door of their family cottage. Liam, who had only been 14 when Finn left, was now a gaunt young man. His eyes were hollow, his face thin with a hunger that wasn't just for food. And there, daubed in what looked like ochre on his cheek, was a symbol that made Finn's blood run cold. A tight, inward-turning spiral, the mark of the chosen, the mark of the offering. The guilt, a creature Finn kept chained in the deepest part of himself, roared to life. He had escaped. He had fled the suffocating fog, the whispering bogs, and the weight of tradition that crushed the Isle of Crows under its heel, and he had left Liam behind to bear it all. He packed a single bag, weatherproof clothing, a sturdy knife, a flask of whiskey, and his old Webley revolver, cleaned and oiled from a habit he could never quite shake. History had taught him that some folklore was written in blood, and some traditions could only be ended by force. The crossing was a descent into purgatory. The ferryman, a mainlander with a face like cured leather, said little, his eyes darting towards the churning gray water as if it might swallow them whole. The Isle of Crows did not appear on the horizon so much as it congealed out of the mist. It was a jagged spine of black rock and sour green peat, perpetually wrapped in a shroud of fog that clung to the water and muffled all sound. Gulls cried overhead, their calls sounding less like birds and more like weeping women. As Finn stepped onto the wet, slick stones of the harbor, the silence was the first thing that struck him. It wasn't peace, it was a held breath. The salt-scoured cottages huddled together, their windows like vacant eyes. No one came to meet the ferry. From behind a grimy pane of glass, a face vanished as he looked up. Paranoia was the island's primary crop, and the harvest was always bountiful. Finn, by all the saints, is that you? The voice cut through the oppressive quiet. Ronan stood at the end of the pier, a broad-shouldered man with a wild red beard and the same sad, kind eyes Finn remembered from their childhood. He was a welcome sight, a single point of familiarity in a world that had become alien. Ronan, Finn said, his voice hoarse. They clasped hands, a brief, hard grip. I heard the ferry horn. Didn't think anyone was mad enough to come out here, Ronan said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Especially not you. I got a letter, Finn said, his gaze sweeping the empty village. From the priest. About Liam. Ronan's face darkened. He kicked at a loose stone on the pier. Aye. Things are tight, Finn. The fishing's been a disaster for 2 seasons. The potatoes are blighted in the 9. The soil. People are scared. And when they're scared, they listen to Elder Maeve. She's talking about the gloom harvest, Finn stated, watching Ronan's reaction. Ronan spat on the ground. She's talking about a lot of things. Old things. Things better left buried in the peat. Come on, your cottage is still standing. We can talk there. As they walked, the fog swirled around their ankles. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of wet earth and something else, something acrid and ancient. Finn felt the weight of the island settle on him again, a physical pressure on his chest. He had forgotten how it felt to be watched by the standing stones that dotted the hillsides like crooked teeth, how the bog seemed to breathe in the perpetual twilight. He found Father Michael at the small, crumbling church of St. Compsil. The priest was a husk of a man, his hands trembling as he clutched a wooden rosary. "You came," he whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and terror. "Thank God. You have to stop her, Finnian." "What is she planning exactly?" Finn demanded, his voice low. "It's the ritual of the Thorn King, the old name for it," the priest stammered, wringing his hands. "A sacrifice to the thing in the soil, the one the stones keep down. She claims it will bleed life back into the island. She's convinced them. She points to the blight, the empty nets, and tells them the old god is hungry. And Liam?" Father Michael flinched. "He is to be the heartwood, the vessel. They've been preparing him, fasting, mocking him with her filthy symbols. He's the purest soul on the island, she says. The perfect offering." The priest looked away, shamefaced. "I tried to speak against it. She had me silenced. The villagers, they look through me now. They only have eyes for her." Finn left the church with a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He had to see Maeve. Elder Maeve's cottage was at the Prast, edge of the village, nestled against the bog. Smoke curled from its chimney, a deceptively welcoming sight. Inside, it was warm and smelled of dried herbs and peat smoke. Maeve was a small, bird-like woman with eyes as bright and black as yet. She sat by the fire, spinning wool, her hands moving with a fluid, hypnotic grace. "Finnian Blackwood," she said, her voice a soft, melodic lilt. "The prodigal crow returns to the nest. I knew you would. The island calls its own back home. I'm here for my brother, Maeve," Finn said, keeping his hand near the Webley holstered under his jacket. She smiled, a serene, untroubled expression. "Liam is a great honor to his family. He has been chosen to heal us. The land gives, Finnian, but it must also receive. It is the oldest balance. A debt of blood for a bounty of life. You, a man of history, should understand that. This isn't history, it's murder." "Is it?" she countered, her eyes gleaming in the firelight. "Or is it survival? You ran away to your world of books and dust while we stayed. We starved. We watched our children grow thin. Your books can't fill a belly, but the old ways can. The earth beneath us is hungry. We will feed it, and in return, it will feed us." Her charisma was a palpable force. It was easy to see how she could sway a desperate, isolated community. She didn't rant or rave. She spoke with the calm certainty of a prophet. She was offering not just a solution, but a restoration of meaning, a return to a powerful, terrifying past. Over the next 2 days, Finn became a phantom, Ronan his only guide. Together, they scouted the island. Ronan seemed to share his urgency, pointing out the other villagers, their faces blank, their movements listless, as if they were already dreaming of the ritual to come. "They barely speak," Ronan muttered, as they watched a group mend nets with clumsy, lethargic hands. "It's like she sung them all to sleep. We have to get Liam out before the harvest moon. It's 2 nights from now." They found evidence of the preparations, bundles of wicker, black and slick, as if dredged from the bog, hidden in an old fisherman's hut. They found strange spiral carvings on trees at the edge of the peat fields. Each discovery tightened the knot in Finn's gut, but with Ronan by his side, he felt a flicker of hope. They were 2 against the island. It might just be enough. On the morning of the harvest moon, they made a plan. The ritual would be at the Serpent's Teeth, the great standing stone circle at the island's heart. Ronan knew a hidden path through the bog that would let them approach unseen. They would grab Liam during the confusion of the early rites and make for Ronan's boat, hidden in a secluded cove. As twilight bled across the sky, painting the fog in shades of bruised purple and gray, they set out. The air grew colder, heavier. The bog gurgled around them, releasing foul-smelling bubbles of gas. "The main path will be watched," Ronan whispered, leading Finn down a treacherous track marked by knotted rags tied to skeletal hawthorn trees. "This way is safer. It'll bring us out behind the main circle." They moved in silence for what felt like an hour. The path grew narrower, the ground beneath their feet softer, more treacherous. Finn's senses were on high alert. He could hear a low, rhythmic chanting carrying on the wind now, a sound that vibrated deep in his bones. Suddenly, Ronan stopped. "This is it," he said, pointing to a narrow gap between two moss-covered rocks. "Just through there." Finn nodded, his hand on his revolver. He moved to step through the gap, and that's when the world exploded in a flash of pain at the back of his head. He stumbled, his vision swimming with black spots, and fell to his knees. He looked up, confused, into Ronan's face. The sad, kind eyes were gone. In their place was a look of cold, fervent devotion. "I'm sorry, Finn," Ronan said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He held a heavy, smooth stone in his hand. "She promised a future, a real harvest. We all have to feed the soil, you more than anyone. The returning sun. Your blood will make the offering so much stronger." The betrayal was a physical blow, colder and sharper than the rock that had struck him. Figures emerged from the fog behind Ronan villagers, their faces impassive masks. They grabbed Finn's arms, disarming him with practiced efficiency. "Maeve knew you'd come," Ronan said, looking down at him. "She needed you, not just to save your brother, but to be a part of it. The doubter, the runaway, brought back to the fold. It sanctifies the ritual." They dragged him through the gap and into the serpent's teeth. The sight stole the breath from his lungs. In the center of the ring of colossal standing stones, a massive wicker effigy stood, 20 feet high, a grotesque parody of a man. And tied to its chest, his arms outstretched as if on a cross, was Liam. He was pale as bone in the eerie light of the rising harvest moon, the spiral on his cheek a stark black wound. The islanders formed a circle, their chanting a monotonous, hypnotic drone. At the foot of the effigy stood Elder Maeve, her arms raised to the sky. Her voice rose above the others, reciting words in a language that was ancient when the stones were young. "And Talamagul, and Fwil of Freegert," she cried. "The soil is crying. The blood will answer." As she spoke, the ground at the base of the effigy began to churn. Black, viscous mud bubbled up, and with it came splinters of bone-yellowed human femurs, ribs like broken cages, the grinning skulls of forgotten ancestors. Wicker vines, thick as a man's arm, snaked from the earth, twisting and weaving around the bones and mud. A shape began to form. It rose with an awful creaking sucking sound, a mockery of a man forged from the island's very substance. It was tall and skeletal, its limbs disproportionately long. A rack of deer antlers, caked in mud, served as its head. This was the Bog Harvest, the physical manifestation of the island's hunger. It took a shambling, unnatural step, its wicker joints groaning in protest. The villagers didn't flinch. Their eyes were fixed on it, full of awe and terror. Rage burned through Finn's pain. He slammed his head back into the face of the man holding him, stomped on the foot of the other, and broke free. He scrambled for his dropped revolver, but Ronan kicked it away into the mud. "Liam!" he screamed. His brother's head lolled up. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Finn, run." The Bog Harvest turned its antlered head towards the sound. It had no eyes, but Finn felt its ancient, mindless gaze lock onto him. Maeve pointed a trembling finger. "He is part of the tithe!" she shrieked. "Take him! Consecrate this ground with the blood of the faithless!" The creature lurched towards him. Finn dodged, his survival instinct screaming. The creature's arm swung, a club of mud, bone, and wicker, and smashed into one of the standing stones, sending chips of granite flying. It was incredibly strong. He had to think. His gun was gone. He couldn't fight that thing hand to hand. The villagers were a wall of bodies between him and Liam. He scrambled away from the creature, his mind racing through fragments of folklore, pages of books he'd read, tales the old fishermen used to tell before Maeve had twisted them into this nightmare. The heart is bound to the stone is bound to the root is bound to the soil, Father Michael's words. The ritual had a focal point, an anchor. It wasn't the effigy, or Liam. It was one of the stones. The entity beneath the island was being channeled through it. If he could break the connection, He scanned the circle of monoliths. They all looked the same in the flickering torchlight. But Maeve stood before one of them. Her back pressed against it as she chanted, one hand splayed across its surface. And on that stone, glowing with a faint, sickly green light that pulsed in time with her words, was a deeply carved spiral. The same symbol that was on Liam's face. The anchor stone. The Bog Harvest was closing in, its creaking gate deceptively fast. Finn grabbed a fallen torch from the ground. He shoved his way through the entranced villagers, who pushed back with sluggish, unthinking strength. He was a stone fighting against a tide of mud. Ronan appeared in front of him, his face a mask of fury. "You will not ruin this! This is our salvation!" He lunged, and they grappled in the mud. Ronan was stronger, but Finn was more desperate. He brought the torch up, jamming the flaming end into Ronan's shoulder. The man screamed and staggered back, clutching the wound. That was all the opening Finn needed. He sprinted for the anchor stone. The Bog Harvest, seeing its master threatened, let out a sound like stone grinding on bone and charged. Maeve's eyes snapped open, wide with fury. "No!" she screamed. Finn didn't hesitate. He swung the torch like a club with all his might against the carved spiral. The wooden shaft shattered, the flames extinguishing in the damp air. The stone was unmarked. The creature was almost upon him. Desperate, he looked around and saw his Webley, half sunk in the mud near the stone's base. He lunged for it, his fingers closing around the familiar grip. He didn't aim at the creature. He aimed at the stone. He fired once. The bullet sparked off the granite. The Bog Harvest's hand, a claw of wicker and bone, was descending. He fired again and again, aiming for the same spot. The fourth shot found a fissure. A crack appeared in the stone, a black line spider webbing out from the bullet hole in the center of the spiral. A piercing shriek tore through the air, not from Maeve or the creature, but from the earth itself. The sickly green light flared, violently. Finn squeezed the trigger twice more. The stone groaned, and then a huge chunk of it, the part bearing the spiral, broke away and shattered on the ground. The connection was severed. The feedback was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Bog Harvest froze, its head snapping back. The mud sloughed off its frame, the wicker grew brittle and dry, and the bones within it clattered to the ground in a heap of forgotten remains. The entity, its anchor destroyed, recoiled back into the deep earth. Elder Maeve screamed, a terrible thin sound. The power that had flowed through her reversed its course. She convulsed, her body withering, aging a century in a second. Her skin tightened over her bones, her hair turned to white dust, and with a final rattling sigh, she collapsed, a pile of ancient rags and brittle bone. Silence. The villagers blinked, looking around as if waking from a long and terrible dream. Their eyes fell upon the heap of bones, the remains of Maeve, and the terrified, weeping young man tied to the wicker effigy. A collective moan of horror rose from them. Finn didn't wait. He ran to Liam, pulling his knife and sawing through the thick ropes. Liam collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "Finn, I thought you were—" "I know," Finn said, holding him tight. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you." He pulled his brother to his feet. The villagers were in disarray, some wailing, some staring in catatonic shock. Ronan was gone, vanished back into the fog. Ignoring them all, Finn half-carried, half-dragged Liam away from the circle of defiled stones, away from the scene of their island's madness. They found a small fishing boat bobbing in the harbor, its keys still in the ignition. As the first watery light of dawn began to break, Finn steered them away from the Isle of Crows. He didn't look back, but Liam did. "It's dying," Liam whispered. Finn glanced over his shoulder. The fog seemed to be thinning, but it revealed no life. The green of the island looked sickly, the rocks blacker than ever. It was as if the life force Maeve had promised to steal for it had been its own, and in breaking the ritual, he had bled it dry. They sailed into the gray morning. The chugging of the small engine, the only sound. They had escaped. They were alive. But as the Isle of Crows shrank behind them, becoming just another ghost in the mist, Finn knew that a part of them would forever be chained to that circle of stones, haunted by the hungry soil and the creaking gate of the Bog Harvest. They had survived the tradition, but its memory would be a folklore all its own, written in scars upon their souls.